Hello, and welcome to the World War Lab channel. Today's story takes us deep into skies of the Pacific, to a moment when confidence, mathematics, and long-held beliefs were about to collide with a reality no one in the Japanese Navy was prepared for. September 1st, 1943, Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai let his hand hover over the intelligence report, his single good eye. The other lost to American gunners a year earlier, moving slowly across the page. Then he laughed out loud inside the sweltering operations tent. The Americans, the report claimed, had built a new fighter. It was as heavy as a bomber, as wide as a transport aircraft. They called it the Hellcat. According to intelligence estimates, it weighed nearly twice as much as a Zero. To Sakai, it sounded like yet another American failure in aircraft design. Through the open tent flaps, he could see his squadrons of A6M Zeros lined up neatly on the pierced steel planking. They were sleek, agile, and deadly. For 2 years, these aircraft had ruled the skies over the Pacific. British Hurricanes, American P-40s, Dutch Brewster Buffaloes, all had fallen before the guns of the Zero. This new American attempt, this bloated Hellcat, would be no different. What Sakai did not know, what none of the Japanese naval aviators gathering for their morning briefing could possibly know, was that in exactly 30 days, this so-called failure will begin the systematic destruction of Japanese naval aviation. The F6F Hellcat would go on to achieve an astonishing kill ratio of 19-1, destroying 5,223 enemy aircraft while losing only 270 in aerial combat. It would redefine carrier warfare, shatter the backbone of Japanese air power, and prove that the Zero's reign of terror had been built on a foundation of fatal assumptions. The mathematics of aerial supremacy were about to be rewritten by an aircraft that looked wrong, flew heavy, and seemed to violate every principle the Japanese had perfected. And yet, within 6 months, the very pilots who now laughed at these intelligence reports would be writing final letters home, knowing that encountering Hellcats meant a statistical certainty of death. The rising sun had reached its zenith. The confidence of the Japanese Navy in September 1943 was not arrogance. It was mathematics. Since December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had achieved victory ratios that defied belief. At Pearl Harbor, they lost only 29 aircraft while destroying 347. In the Philippines, 7 losses against 103 destroyed. Over Darwin, 2 losses versus 30 enemy aircraft. The British Far East Fleet's air arm had been annihilated. The Dutch East Indies Air Force had been wiped out in a matter of days. At the heart of this dominance was the Mitsubishi A6M Zero, an aircraft that had rewritten the rules of fighter design. When captured examples were tested by American engineers in 1942, many initially refused to believe the performance figures. A fighter with the range of a bomber, the maneuverability of a biplane, and the firepower to destroy anything it caught seemed impossible. It felt like a contradiction of everything modern aviation theory suggested. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who would later become Japan's ace of aces with 87 confirmed victories, described the Zero in his recovered diary. Flying the Zero is like wearing wings. The aircraft responds to thought, not merely to control input. American planes fly like trucks. Powerful, yes, but clumsy. They build fighters the way they build cars. Heavy, overbuilt, and wasteful. The Zero achieved this miraculous performance through a revolutionary design philosophy, extra super derailleur, a classified aluminum alloy, created a structure that was 30% lighter than comparable American designs. There was no armor plate to protect the pilot. There were no self-sealing fuel tanks to add weight. Even the radio was often removed to save precious pounds. Every single ounce was sacrificed in the pursuit of performance. Then came the intelligence dismissals. The first reports of the F6F Hellcat reached Japanese intelligence through neutral Swedish sources in early 1943. The specifications sounded unbelievable, like propaganda or deliberate misinformation. The aircraft weighed 12,186 pounds fully loaded. The Zero weighed only 5,800. The Hellcat's wing area spanned 334 square feet and carried a bulky radial engine. It carried 2,400 rounds of ammunition, armor plate throughout the cockpit, bulletproof glass, and self-sealing fuel tanks holding 250 gallons of fuel. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius who had helped plan the attack on Pearl Harbor, reviewed the specifications at Combined Fleet Headquarters. His analysis, preserved in Japanese defense archives, was openly dismissive. The Americans have learned nothing. This Hellcat represents the continuation of their failed philosophy, trying to overcome pilot skill with the weight of machinery. A Zero will fly circles around it. The mathematics seem to support his conclusion. The Zero's wing loading of 22 pounds per square foot gave it a turning radius of approximately 612 feet. The Hellcat's wing loading of 36.5 pounds per square foot suggested a turning radius exceeding 900 feet. In a turning fight, the foundation of all Japanese fighter tactics, the Hellcat would be helpless. The first glimpse came on September 30th, 1943, near Marcus Island. Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui was flying escort for a reconnaissance mission when he spotted them, 6 dark blue shapes climbing from the southeast. His first thought, recorded later in his after-action report, was that they would be 25 bombers flying on a strange heading. Then they turned and he saw the distinctive silhouette, single-engine aircraft, massive fuselage, wings that looked almost too short for the body. First encounter with F6F type fighter, he would write, initial impression, Americans have mounted fighter guns on a torpedo bomber. Engage with standard tactics. Standard tactics meant using the Zero's superior turning ability to slip onto the enemy's tail. Fukui rolled into a diving turn, expecting the heavy American fighter to continue straight ahead, allowing him to curve smoothly into its 6 o'clock position. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The Hellcat did not run. It did not try to turn with him. It went vertical. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, producing 2,000 horsepower, 700 more than the Zero's Nadajimasake engine with its 1,130 horsepower, drove the Hellcat upward at 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui tried to follow, but he could feel his airspeed bleeding away as the Zero fought against gravity. By the time they reached 15,000 feet, the Hellcat performed a maneuver that should not have been possible for an aircraft of its size and weight. It executed a hammerhead turn, pivoting at the top of its climb and dropping directly onto Fukui's tail. The American opened fire at 400 meters. Fukui reported later, 6 machine guns, not the 4 we expected. The volume of fire was unprecedented. My aircraft took 17 hits in 3 seconds. Only by dropping into a spin did I escape. Fukui survived, barely managing to limp back to Marcus Island with a Zero riddled with holes. His wingman, Petty Officer Second Class Masao, did not return. Neither did the reconnaissance aircraft they had been escorting. First blood belonged to the Hellcat. The weight paradox. October 5th, 1943. Task Force 14 struck Wake Island. Lieutenant Yoshio led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what appeared to be another nuisance raid. For months, American carriers had been launching these quick hit-and-run attacks, usually withdrawing before Japanese fighters could fully engage. This time, they believed it would be different. We climbed to 20,000 feet, Shiga recorded in his diary. Below us were 12 F6F fighters in 3 divisions. We held every advantage. Altitude, position, surprise. Victory was certain. What followed shattered Japanese tactical doctrine. As the Zeros dove on the Hellcats, the American fighters did not scatter or attempt to turn. They held their formation, accelerating in a shallow dive that preserved their energy. When the Zeros opened fire at maximum range, hoping for lucky hits, the Hellcats simply absorbed the punishment. Their armor included 212 pounds of plate protecting the pilot, 110 pounds shielding the oil system, and self-sealing fuel tanks that could withstand dozens of impacts. As the Zeros exhausted their ammunition in repeated diving attacks, the Hellcats launched their counterstrike. Instead of turning to dogfight, they used their weight as a weapon. Climbing at full power, they reached altitudes where the Zero's engines struggled for oxygen. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat was still producing 1,650 horsepower. The Zero had fallen to 900. They came down on us like hawks on sparrows, Shiga wrote. Their weight gave them speed we could not match. They would dive, fire those 6 terrible guns, then climb away before we could react. 8 Zeros were shot down. No Hellcats were lost. The Marianas Turkey Shoot Prophecy. November 11, 1943. Rabaul. The assembled pilots of the 204th Air Group listened as Lieutenant Commander Tadao Tanamizu briefed them on American tactics. With 32 victories, Tanamizu was one of the few men who had survived multiple encounters with Hellcats. "Forget everything you know about air combat," he told them. "The Americans have changed the rules. They no longer fight our fight. They fight like executioners, not warriors." Tanamizu explained what Japanese pilots were slowly and fatally learning. The Hellcat was not designed to outturn the Zero. It was designed so it never had to. Using a doctrine called energy fighting, Hellcat pilots maintained speed and altitude, converting potential energy into kinetic energy in slashing attacks that gave Zero pilots no chance to use their superior maneuverability. "They work in pairs," Tanamizu continued. "One high, one low. While you engage one, the other is already diving on you. Their radios, which we laughed at for adding weight, allow them to coordinate perfectly. We fly as individual samurai. They fight as a machine." The Technology Gulf. December 1943. Truck Lagoon. Commander Mitsuo Fukuda, who had led the attack on Pearl Harbor, now served as Air Operations Officer for Combined Fleet. His inspection of damaged Zeros returning from encounters with Hellcats revealed the growing technological divide. The disparity in firepower was mathematical. The Hellcat 6 Browning M2 machine guns fired 750 rounds per minute each, for a total of 4,500 rounds per minute. Each .50 caliber bullet weighed 46 grams and traveled at 2,900 feet per second, delivering 3,500 foot-pounds of energy. The Zero's 7.7 millimeters machine guns fired projectiles weighing 11 grams at 2,300 feet per second, delivering only 750 foot-pounds of energy. Even more disturbing were reports of American radar-guided fighter direction. While Japanese pilots still relied entirely on eyesight to locate enemies, Hellcat pilots were being guided by shipboard radar controllers who could detect Japanese aircraft from 50 miles away. Lieutenant Sadamu Kamachi described his first radar-directed interception. "We were climbing through clouds when they struck. No warning, no visual contact. Hellcats diving from above, exactly on our heading, perfectly positioned. They knew where we were, our altitude, our course. We were blind men fighting those who could see in the dark." The pilot equation. January 1944. The Japanese pilot crisis was becoming catastrophic. Before the war, the Imperial Navy's pilot training program had been the most demanding in the world. Training lasted 3 years, and pilots entered combat with 700 flight hours. Army pilots received a minimum of 500 hours. They were artists of aerial combat, trained in aerobatics, gunnery, and the spiritual philosophy of air fighting. By early 1944, Japanese naval pilots were entering combat with only 300 hours of flight time. Army pilots had just 200. Fuel shortages meant most training was now done in gliders. Gunnery practice was limited to 50 rounds per pilot. Formation flying, instrument training, and radio procedures were eliminated to rush men to the front. Meanwhile, American pilots were arriving with a minimum of 300 hours, including 50 hours in their specific aircraft type. They had fired thousands of practice rounds, practiced carrier landings until they became automatic, and learned energy tactics safely over the airfields of Texas. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, training officer at Kasumigaura Naval Air Station. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, serving as a training officer there, wrote in his final report, "We are sending children to fight professionals." The situation was already beyond crisis. Only yesterday, Ensign Yamamoto had arrived at the front. He had never fired his guns in flight. "We have no ammunition for practice." He had never flown at night. "We have no fuel for such training." He lasted 7 minutes in his first combat, the Formosa Revelation. October 12th to 16th, 1944. The Battle of Formosa. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, commander of the 2nd Air Fleet, committed everything he had to stop the American carrier raids on Formosa. Over 700 aircraft were thrown into the battle, including the last trained pilots from the Homeland Training Squadrons. Japanese reports claimed spectacular success. 26 American carriers and battleships sunk. 300 enemy aircraft destroyed. The truth, discovered only after pilots returned and gun camera footage was developed, was catastrophic. Actual American losses were 89 aircraft. Japanese losses were 329 aircraft, along with almost every remaining experienced pilot. Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, one of the few surviving veterans, described the slaughter in his memoirs. "The Hellcats were waiting at every altitude. As we climbed, they were above us. As we dove, they were below us. They had divided the sky into grids, each section covered by a division. It was not combat. It was systematic extermination." The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea. The Japanese Navy committed its reconstituted carrier force to Operation Ago. The decisive battle meant to destroy American carrier power in the Pacific. 9 carriers, 450 aircraft, and their best remaining pilots. Against them stood Task Force 58 with 15 carriers and 956 aircraft, 450 of them F6F Hellcats. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched his strikes in 4 waves, confident that Japanese pilot skill and the Zero's superior range would prevail. The first wave of 69 aircraft launched at 0830. American radar detected them at 150 miles. Hellcats were vector for interception with perfect positioning. Altitude advantage. The sun at their backs, approaching from the Japanese blind spots. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading the fighter escort, saw the Hellcats minutes before engagement. They were stacked from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, at least 60 of them, waiting like a steel curtain. We were at 18,000 feet. Every advantage was theirs. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. Of the 69 Japanese aircraft, 42 were shot down. Commander David McCampbell, Air Group Commander of Air Group 15, shot down 7 aircraft in that single day. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, destroyed 6. "The Zeros tried to turn with us," McCampbell reported. "We simply refused. We would make a high side run, shoot one down, then zoom climb back to altitude. They would try to follow, stall out, and another Hellcat would pick them off." By the end of the day, the Japanese had lost 346 carrier aircraft, plus 50 land-based aircraft. American losses were 30 aircraft from all causes. That evening, in their ready rooms, American pilots coined the term turkey shoot. The enemy aircraft had been as helpless as game birds. The Leyte Gulf Record. October 24th, 1944. The Battle of Leyte Gulf. Commander David McCampbell would set his single mission record during this battle. Leading 7 Hellcats from the carrier Essex, he intercepted a force of 60 Japanese aircraft heading toward the American fleet. In the ensuing 90-minute battle, McCampbell shot down 9 aircraft, 5 Zeros and 4 bombers, while his wingman, Roy Rushing, destroyed 6 more. "I ran out of ammunition after the 9th kill," McCampbell recorded. "The Hellcat performed flawlessly throughout. Not a single hit on my aircraft, despite being outnumbered 8-1. This engagement demonstrated a complete reversal of air superiority. 7 Hellcats had routed 60 Japanese aircraft, destroying 15 without loss. McCampbell's 2 ace-in-the-day performances, 7 kills on June 19th and 9 on October 24th, earned him the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. The psychological collapse. The aftermath of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf battles produced what Japanese military psychologists later called Hellcat psychosis among surviving pilots. Admiral Ozawa wrote in his after-action report, "The enemy's radar-guided fighter direction achieved something we believed impossible, the industrialization of air combat. Each Hellcat was not an individual fighter, but a component in a vast machine. Our pilots, no matter how skilled, were not fighting planes but a system." The pilot shortage became so severe that by early 1945, training was reduced to 40 to 50 hours for Navy pilots and 60 to 70 hours for Army pilots. Kamikaze pilots received only 40 to 50 hours total, roughly 7 days of training. The Okinawa Apocalypse. April to June 1945. Operation Iceberg. The Japanese launched 1,900 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet off Okinawa. The Hellcat became not just a fighter, but a shield against the desperation of suicide attacks. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, leading his famous Flying Circus division of Hellcats, shot down 23 Japanese aircraft during the campaign. His tactical innovations, using divisions of 4 aircraft in tightly coordinated attacks, made traditional Japanese tactics suicidal. "We developed what we call the mowing machine," Valencia explained. 4 Hellcats in a line abreast, separated by 100 yards, would sweep through Japanese formations at high speed. Each pilot covered his own sector. We would make one pass, climb back to altitude, and repeat. The mathematics of the Okinawa campaign were stark. Hellcats flew 38,038 combat sorties, claiming 2,351 victories against 249 losses, a kill ratio of 9.5 to 1. More importantly, they prevented roughly 80% of kamikaze aircraft from ever reaching their targets. The technology chasm. By 1945, the technological gap had become impossible to bridge. The F6F Hellcat incorporated a series of upgrades that made it even more lethal. Water injection boosted engine power to 2,200 horsepower. Zero-length rocket launchers were added, armor protection was improved, and the revolutionary K-14 computing gun sight could automatically calculate deflection, allowing pilots to place accurate fire with unprecedented ease. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace with 28 official victories, though modern historians estimate closer to 15, encountered Hellcats for the first time in June 1944. Despite his immense skill and experience, he was nearly killed in his very first engagement. "I performed my best aerobatics," he wrote in his autobiography. "Loops, rolls, splits, every maneuver I had perfected over more than 200 combats." The Hellcat followed easily, almost casually. "I survived only because the American pilot made an error. He forgot to release his drop tank before combat." The human cost accounting. By the end of the war, the F6F Hellcat had destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat. It had lost only 270 aircraft to enemy fighters, achieving a kill ratio of 19.3 to 1. It produced 305 U.S. Navy aces and accounted for 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories. For Japan, the human cost was catastrophic. Of the 18,000 naval aviators who had begun the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained by August 1945. The Kamikaze equation. The transformation of Japanese naval aviation from an elite fighting force into suicide operations was the ultimate admission of Hellcat superiority. Unable to compete conventionally, Japan turned its pilots into guided missiles. Vice Admiral Tajiro Onishi, the father of the Kamikaze program, justified it with brutal mathematics. If a Zero attacked a carrier in conventional combat, the probability of success was near zero. The Hellcats would destroy it. If the Zero became a bomb, the probability of hitting increased to 30%. The pilot would die either way. At least as a kamikaze, his death would have meaning. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa escorted the first official kamikaze mission led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki, claiming his 86th and 87th victories in the process, 2 F6F Hellcats. The following day, October 26, 1944, Nishizawa himself died as a passenger aboard a transport aircraft that was shot down by Hellcats from VF-14. Japan's greatest ace, helpless without a fighter, fell to the very aircraft he had briefly defeated. The final testimony. August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast. At Tsuji Airfield, Captain Minoru Genda, the man who had once dismissed a Hellcat as weight over finesse, listened to the Emperor's words. Around him sat the remnants of Japanese naval aviation. Teenage pilots with barely 40 hours of flight time. Aircraft cobbled together from spare parts, empty fuel tanks, broken confidence. That same day, Ensign Clarence Moore VF-31, flying from USS Belleauwood, shot down a Yokosuka D-4 wide duty dive bomber shortly after 2 p.m., the last aerial victory of World War II. The Japanese pilot, apparently unaware of the surrender, was approaching the American fleet when Moore intercepted him. 2 short bursts from a Hellcat's 6 guns ended the Pacific Air War. The occupation revelation. September 1945, at Tsuji Airfield, the first American aircraft to land after the surrender were 12 F6F Hellcats from USS Yorktown. Japanese pilots, mechanics, and ground crew lined the runway to see their tormentor up close. American pilot Lieutenant Robert Vaught, an ace with 19 victories, demonstrated the Hellcat's capabilities for them. His casual aerobatics, loops, rolls, and climbs that would have torn a Zero apart left the Japanese observers speechless. "You have to understand," Vaught told them through an interpreter, "this isn't even pushing it. In combat with water injection, it's 20% more powerful. The plane is stressed for 13 GS. I've never managed to break one." The engineering postmortem. Japanese engineers studying captured Hellcats after the war discovered the true scale of American industrial superiority. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine contained 2,840 precision machine parts, each one interchangeable with any other R-2800 engine. The Nakajima Sakai engine required hand-fitting of components. No 2 engines were exactly alike. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, the designer of the Zero, studied a Hellcat extensively after the war. His conclusion was devastating. "We designed an aircraft for 1941. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. While we were perfecting the sword, they were building the industrial age." The production miracle. Grumman's production of the Hellcat itself became a weapon. The Bethpage, New York factory operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At peak output, a new Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every 60 minutes. The company produced 12,275 Hellcats in just 30 months, a figure the Japanese could barely comprehend. In 1944, Japan produced 5,100 fighters of all types. America produced 35,000 fighters in that single year alone. The production system included innovations that seemed impossible to Japanese observers, workers using color-coded instructions to assemble complex components, shifts operating around the clock, and quality maintained despite staggering speed. The strategic revolution. The Hellcat did not merely win battles. It transformed naval warfare itself. Pre-war doctrine assumed that aircraft carriers were fragile platforms that had to strike first to survive. The Hellcat inverted that logic. Carriers became floating fortresses, able to absorb and repel any air attack. World War Lab presents the final chapter of a story that changed the balance of air power forever. Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Task Force 58, understood this transformation better than anyone. "With the Hellcat, we no longer need to find them first," he said. "Let them come. The F6F will destroy them at our convenience." That confidence unlocked a new kind of warfare. American carriers could remain off enemy coastlines for weeks at a time, their protective umbrella of Hellcats making them almost immune to air attack. For the first time in history, carrier fleets became not fragile striking forces, but fortified strongholds at sea. The cultural collision went deeper than technology. Beyond engines, armor, and guns, the Hellcat represented a philosophy that shattered Japanese military doctrine. The samurai tradition valued individual excellence, spiritual discipline, and acceptance of death. The Hellcat embodied systematic efficiency, material superiority, coordination, and the preservation of life. This philosophical gap made adaptation almost impossible. Even when Japanese pilots understood Hellcat tactics, they could not truly accept them. The idea of refusing combat when disadvantaged, fundamental to American doctrine, was literally unthinkable to pilots trained in Bushido, where honor demanded engagement regardless of the odds. The judgment of history came years later. In 1962, the United States Navy held a symposium on Pacific War aviation. American and Japanese veterans gathered to reflect with the clarity of time. Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's ace of aces with 34 victories, spoke without hesitation. The Hellcat won the Pacific Air War. Period. It destroyed Japanese aviation and made our victory inevitable. Commander Saburo Sakai responded with equal honesty. The Zero was a superior fighter. The Hellcat was a superior weapon system. We never understood the difference until it was too late. We brought swords to a gunfight and wondered why we lost. The ultimate reckoning can be reduced to simple mathematics that tell a devastating story. Overall kill ratio, 19-1. Against the Zero specifically, 13-1. Hellcats produced 12,275 in just 30 months. Zeros produced from 1943 to 1945, approximately 6,000. American pilots trained on the Hellcat, over 5,000. Japanese pilots remaining by August 1945 who were combat capable, fewer than 100. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, who had commanded the Japanese fleet during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, offered perhaps the most honest assessment of all. We laughed at the Hellcat because we did not understand that it represented not just an aircraft, but an entire civilization's approach to war. By the time we stopped laughing, our air forces had ceased to exist. The last word belonged to Saburo Sakai. He lived until the year 2000, long enough to see how history judged a machine he once underestimated. In his final interview, when asked about the Hellcat, he said, "The Zero made Japan a great naval power. The Hellcat made Japan realize it was never as great as it believed. We thought we were samurai. The Hellcat showed us we were just men with outdated weapons facing future." Every Japanese pilot who survived the war, Sakai believed, survived because a Hellcat pilot chose to let them live. That was the ultimate defeat, existing only at the discretion of your enemy. The F6F Hellcat entered service weighing twice as much as the Zero. It carried armor the Zero did not have. It was powered by an engine the Japanese could not build. It was armed with weapons they could not match, guided by radars they could not detect, flown by pilots trained in a system they could not replicate, and produced in numbers they could not comprehend. Japanese pilots laughed at it because they believed weight meant weakness. They did not understand that every extra pound represented the strength of an industrial democracy that could afford to protect its warriors. By the time they understood, their laughter had turned into final letters home, their mockery into kamikaze missions, and their confidence into complete collapse. The Hellcat did not merely defeat the Zero. It destroyed an entire philosophy of warfare. It proved that in modern combat, the nation that could build a better system would always defeat the nation that could only build better warriors. The Japanese pilots laughed at the F6F Hellcat. The Hellcat had the last laugh. It always did.